At 55, fashion photographer Richard Avedon was at the height of his career, shooting the likes of Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe and Richard Nixon. After suffering from a life-threatening heart inflammation, he began to grapple with his own mortality. It was the feelings and emotions of those days that instilled a desire in him to work on a project away from the glitter and glamour of the fashion industry. Photography was a way for Avedon to face the things that scared him, like the death of his father or his sister's battle with schizophrenia. Richard Avedon's contribution to fashion photography was already celebrated as groundbreaking in his lifetime, but it was the raw and provoking portrait series focusing mostly on the working class people throughout the Western US that would become his most important body of work. In 1979, the Amon Carter Museum of American Art in Texas invited Avedon to work on a collaborative project. It was agreed that Avedon would spend 6 summers between the years of 79 and 84 photographing his vision of the American West. Before knowing what he would find, he was clear about one thing: he wouldn't glorify or romanticize. Traditionally, most art that depicted the American West were pristine landscapes, like the ones photographer Ansel was known for. Or in the eye of Hollywood, it was the land of cowboys and adventure. For Avedon, it was clear his Native Americans would be of a different kind. He wanted to focus his lens on a group of people who were oftentimes overlooked. The hard-working individuals doing physically demanding labor, the everyday people, the drifters, and the lives well lived, shaped by an unforgiving landscape. And he was going to capture them in his signature photographic style, black and white film on white paper background. For Avedon, this minimalistic approach was the ultimate concentration on human expression, emotion, and body language. No environment or prop to distract from the one thing that interested him the most: the face. Equipped with 3 assistants at all times, the team set out for the road many times, sometimes weeks, sometimes months on end. Together they were driving through the Rocky Mountain states, central Texas, and all the way to the Canadian border. Before beginning to shoot the project officially, Avedon decided to do a test shoot, which he arranged to do at a rattlesnake roundup in Sweetwater, Texas. One of the very famous portraits of the book was taken at this very first shoot. A 13-year-old rattlesnake skinner presents his work to the camera with a stern look on his face. His young face and his soft blonde hair create a tense contrast to his blood-stained apron. Avedon shot the entire project on an 8x10-inch large format Dairdrop camera and on Kodak 3X film. Cameras had made a great technical advance in the middle of the 20th century, but Avedon was drawn to working with large view or medium format cameras. A lot of his work was shot on 8x10 film, whether he was shooting in the studio or in the field. Since 1936, with the introduction of Kodak Chrome, the first mass-produced color film came to the market, so color photography had also been around for 40 years when Avedon shot in the American West. But black and white film remained his most used choice for commercial and personal works throughout his career. The size of an 8x10 negative format is approximately 60 times bigger than one frame on a 35mm roll. The sharpness it produces, and therefore the amount of detail in print, is unparalleled in any other format. Generally speaking, the size of the negative film can be compared to today's size of sensors in digital cameras. The larger the sensor or the negative, the better quality and more detailed the print. Working with a camera of this kind required Avedon to know his craft perfectly. With a razor-thin depth of field, Avedon directed his subjects to stand extremely still. Looking through a large view camera, the image shows upside down and side reversed. Large format cameras only take one frame at a time, as opposed to a film of 35mm roll or a medium format roll, which allows you to take 36 or 12 pictures respectively. This makes for a much slower process of shooting, but always having two technical assistants by his side, it is said that Avedon's workflow was incredibly fast.
All done.
This, on the other hand, was because he believed that the moment of focus and attention any sitter will give you is a fleeting, short window. After that, the intensity he was always chasing is gone. Whenever Avedon found a face he was interested in photographing, he would tape his white paper to any wall that provided shade, avoiding direct sunlight. All portraits in this book were shot with natural light and reflectors only. Although many of the portraits were the results of random meetings, some of them also had meticulous planning involved, such as the famous portrait of the beekeeper Ronald Fisher. Avedon had a vision for this shot, and so he advertised in the Beekeeper's Journal to find a subject who would be willing to sit for a portrait session with hundreds of live bees on his body. The session was conducted over 3 sittings in 2 days. Avedon shot 121 sheets of film for this portrait alone. In the end, he had to decide between the 2 frames that he liked the best. One that he described as a Christian martyr-like image. You can see the pain of bee stings in his eyes, but he endures the suffering for a greater good. In comparison, the other frame is an image of calmness, one that transcends suffering and that rests in inner peace, more in the spirit of Buddhism. He selected the latter one. Since the Texas oil boom, there had been countless oil rigs throughout the region that offered work for many men. But it was a dangerous job and a demanding one. Some of the men worked 48-hour shifts under greatest physical strain, in unbearable heat. Avedon and his team visited many of the rigs, where he photographed many oil workers, with hard physical labor written all over their faces. But the beginning of the project coincided with the beginning of an oil crisis, and so many former oil workers in the West suddenly got laid off and found themselves in ghosted towns and out of work. Always hunting a face that tells a story, Avedon was looking for a variety of human experiences. At one point, he was particularly interested in tattoos. Shortly after gaining access to Bexar County Jail, he photographed inmates with religious chest tattoos. Those tattoos were hand-drawn and stitched with ink from magic markers. He selected 2 men, Jesus and Manuel, to be shot together. It seemed to Avedon as if the 2 were like twins who had never met. Both of their chests were adorned with large faces of Jesus Christ, and both of them also had a large scar on their stomachs. Another very startling portrait that has left many viewers feeling pierced by the intensity of dark eyes is the portrait of Native American Benson James. His portrait was named Drifter by Avedon, which caused Benson's mother to write a letter to Avedon when she received a copy of the book upon publication. Benson had been murdered with over 20 stab wounds a year after the photograph was taken, and he had been dead for 5 years already when his mother received the book. She expressed her disapproval to Avedon and asked if he had been paid for the portrait. The family of Benson James were not the only people who criticized the work after publication. Avedon himself felt it was met with hostility despite its large success. Many felt that a successful urban photographer from the East shooting celebrities had little business shooting working-class people from the West and questioned his intention. Many went as far as calling the portraits exploitative. Others, on the other hand, found seeing their faces in life-size museum prints transformative. Billy Mudd, photographed by Avedon in 1981, was a trucker, excessively drinking and being away from his family a lot. He recalled that seeing after his face in such a gripping way drove him to make changes in his life for the better.
Like a out-of-body experience. And it terrified me because I seen myself looking at myself in no way that a mirror could ever capture it. This blowed up to where I was looking at myself. And I thought I was dead.
But whether or not the portraits Avedon took of the people he met along the way resonated with them, he always saw his sittings to be a collaboration with his subjects, and he was adamant it was impossible for him to capture anything that wasn't already in the subjects to begin with. However, he was also aware that the final powers and decisions were resting in his hands.
So what was very difficult for me was that you caught me, you say vulnerable here, that was true, but also bare bottom, really exposed.
You can't say you weren't in the picture. That's what's so confusing about photography.
Right.
But you have to accept that you are there and the control is with the photographer. You have a certain amount of control. In the end, I can tear the pictures up. I can choose the smiling one or the serious one. It's lending yourself to artists.
In later years, he returned to some of the protagonists whose stories left an impression on him in an effort to show his appreciation. But nevertheless, it seemed as if part of Avedon felt like he was deserting the people he photographed, and he once said he wished he could have stayed with this project forever. Avedon exposed a total of 17,000 sheets of film for the project and shot 752 faces, of which 123 got selected for the exhibition and a subsequent book. Today, the negatives that were chosen to be included in the project are stored in the archives of the Amon Carter Museum, with the instruction to never be printed again. The unused negatives of 629 photographed faces were subsequently destroyed. In 2016, a print of the slaughterhouse worker sold for £161,000 at an art auction. The printing process of a project of this scale was a huge undertaking. It took over a year of work from the printers to match the final results with Avedon's vision of them. Although the black negative film lines seen around each portrait might suggest that there was no manipulation done to the negatives, such as cropping, but Avedon actually used the techniques of manipulation extensively in his work. And besides the traditional process of dodging and burning, he also had whole elements like lips and moustaches swapped out in his negatives. Many people in the West might not have agreed with the book when it came out, but through rejecting Avedon's view of themselves, it ultimately made them question who they were to themselves, and that, by virtue, was the only art worth making for Avedon himself.